Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we visit the whimsical family farm with dinosaurs, fairies, and a giant mushroom. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here on this whimsical journey with me to Whoopsa Daisy Farm in Kenosha Township is once again the one and the only Jay Gabler. Welcome back, Jay.
Thanks, Wyatt. Glad to be here.
So, Jay, how is it that we ended up at Whoopsa Daisy Farm? I keep wanting to say Whoopsie. In fact, I had to re-record the intro briefly because I just keep going back to the old trope of Whoopsie Daisy, but it's not quite Whoopsie.
I suppose you could spell it any number of ways based on the folk exclamation, but the way it is spelled officially in the name of this farm is Whoopsa, Whoopsa Daisy Farm. And I found out about them through a press release. Owner Diane Podgornick wrote to news media saying, hey, we're open for the season. And I was especially intrigued by the fact that not only is this a farm, this is a farm with dinosaurs, giant mushroom, fairies, and many more little surprises we discovered.
Mm-hmm. And so what exactly is Whoopsa Daisy Farm?
Well, I'll let Diane explain for herself.
The Whoopsa Daisy Farm is an agritourism farm, which means it's a place for families to come, bring their kids, take a wagon ride, be on the farm, feed the animals, play in the corn pit, walk through Dinoland. So it's a place just to have fun and play.
And where is it exactly? I can say definitively that it is near the airport because when we went there must have been some kind of military practice or something because there was like full-blown jets like flying around while we were there.
Yeah, so this is a 29-acre parcel that the Podgornicks, Diane and her husband Mike, own. And within that, about 4 acres, Diane said, are the publicly available farm that's open just Fridays through Sundays in August, September, and October. And Kenosha Township, if you are from the area, you may know exactly where that is. Then again, you may not. It is a township that is located at least the farm is located just northwest of the Duluth International Airport. So my family and I live in East Hillside neighborhood, and it takes us 25 minutes to drive there. So it's a good little haul, but basically in Duluth. You could say just outside of Duluth. One of the things that interested me about this farm is that it is in Duluth, in the Northland, in northeastern Minnesota, which, as I know from having previously reported on the Northland's involvement or sometimes lack thereof with the Minnesota State Fair, northeastern Minnesota is the least agricultural region of Minnesota. And that's not just because we're not interested in growing things up here. It is for very specific geological reasons, as Diane explains.
Well, there's 2 things that most of the agritourism farms have: pumpkin patch and a corn maze, neither of which I can grow here. I've tried. I'm on glacial till. Everything here is rock. It's not real warm here, so I couldn't do those 2 things. So I had to come up with something unique. So I just started doing what I could do in northern Minnesota.
So I like that this is a farm that introduces agriculture to a lot of families who may not spend as much time on farms as they would if they were living in or visiting southeastern Minnesota, south central Minnesota, basically the southern part of the state with richer soil.
Now, for long time, and I mean long time, listeners of the podcast, Diane Podgornick might be a familiar name to you. I'm going to give it a moment. I'm going to pause for a second for listeners to try to think about it.
This is a deep, deep cut, Wyatt. There are a number of links between Whoopsa Daisy Farm and the Northlandia universe writ large. One of the whimsical creatures that you might spot if you take a wagon ride at the farm is a Sasquatch, which hails back to the very first Northlandia ever, all about the Sasquatch Hunters Conference, or Bigfoot Hunters Conference, as it's technically called, in northeastern Minnesota. So there's that little link.
More of a reference, I'd say, for that one.
Yep. Then there's the fact that they grow blueberries you can pick on the farm. And just very recently, Northlandia covered the link between Northland blueberries and Minnesota's state muffin. But Diane specifically came up in the Northlandia story about Bluther and Razzleberry, the defunct mascots of WDSE, now known as PBS North, from about the mid-1990s until just shy of 2010, there were these two homemade characters who served as mascots on air and at apparently live events associated with WDSE. And yes, Diane's name came up in that story because she actually made those costumes.
Yeah, just to be clear, she didn't create the characters, but she did create the costumes for the characters.
I didn't report that story. That was our former colleague, Joe Bowen, so he would be the expert there. But yeah, my understanding is it may have been a collaborative endeavor in terms of understanding what the characters would be, but it was Diane who put the costumes together. And I was not surprised to learn that because as we learned visiting Whoopsa Daisy Farm, Diane makes just about everything. As a matter of fact, she told me that basically the farm is a giant hobby for her. It makes enough money to keep her in materials to buy, to keep crafting everything from a 14-foot mushroom down to quilts or, hats or whatever that she's making. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised that Diane was the one to make those unique creations, Luther and Razzleberry.
Mm-hmm. And for those who are wanting to look back and listen to that episode or want to listen to it again, because it has been a couple years since that episode came out, it's episode 10 of the podcast. Now let's talk more about Diane's background and how she came to be taking on this particular project.
Yeah, those are my first questions for Diane. And I learned that this is actually, technically speaking, a retirement project for her. She didn't even start it until after she had retired from her first career. Here's Diane.
I started about 6 years ago. I'm a retired science teacher from Proctor, and I decided to continue doing things with kids. So, and it really started out that I wanted to just build an orchard for myself, and it kind of got out of hand. And then we ended up getting donkeys and chickens and goats, and then people started coming over, just friends of ours, and really enjoyed it. And so I kind of came up with the idea to open it up to the public.
What's fun for me about Whoopsa Daisy Farm, besides it just being a beautiful place to visit and a fun area to explore, is it sort of has this evolving feeling to it. And I don't want to overstate this comparison, but I am put in mind of one of the great quirky attractions of the entire upper Midwest, the House on the Rock in Wisconsin. And what's fascinating about that project, among many things, is the fact that as people started coming to that attraction, it just grew and grew and grew as the guy who built it just put the money that he made back into the attraction, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until he then died. But it's huge at this point. And Whoopsa Daisy Farm has some of that same quality. Diane, of course, and Mike are very much alive, well, and continue to expand the farm. But there's sort of the same principle that, as they make money on the farm every year, they improve it. They add to it. They bring new things in. They build new things. They look at what people are enjoying and what some needs might be. And so they add, a climbing course. They add a fairyland. They add some items to the woodland trail. And so there's a sense that this is sort of this growing, living area, and so you feel like you'll never quite reach the end of it, although there are limits to it. You feel like every time you go back, you might discover something new, in part because something new may have been added since the last time you were there.
And although there aren't as many agritourism farms around here as there are other places, it's not unusual for a family to open an attraction like this. But what makes Whoopsa Daisy Farm unique? Besides the name, obviously.
Of course. Yeah, I think it's exactly that feature that it's so personal to the Podgorniks. You feel like there is not another place quite like it. And I love Diane's spirit of fun and exploration. So we just sort of have alluded to this. I'll explain a little bit more detail what they are. So there's a dino land and a fairyland among the other things you can do at Whoopsa Daisy Farm. There are, I'll just list some of the attractions. So you've got animals, Diane mentioned those, that you can play with. There's a big corn pit that you can play in, which is basically a gigantic sandbox full of dried corn kernels. There also is a sandbox, a giant sandbox you can play in. There are a lot of trucks and balls. There are tractors you can hop onto and, pretend you're driving. I think some of them may actually move at some points. There's the wagon ride you can take. So there are all sorts of very farm-like things that you can do. But then also you can take these walks through the woods, and one little walk through the woods, you just discovered dinosaurs all over. Some of them are sort of big models of dinosaurs that populate the woods. Others are just little actual toys that kids can pick up and play with. And then right next to Dinoland, there's a similar area for sort of fantasy creatures. So I asked Diane, how did these lands come to be? How did you have the idea to create these spaces within your agritourism farm?
I go to the thrift stores, and whatever I find that's cute, I buy. And the things I ended up finding a lot of were horses and dinosaurs. And then every little girl that walked in had a unicorn on their shirt or their jacket or their shoes, and so I figured I had to add Fairyland as well.
So that's how Dinoland and Fairyland came to be. Then they also have what Diane calls the whimsical woods. You can hop on a little wagon pulled by a gator utility vehicle and take a little ride. It's just, several minute ride through the woods, but it's fun because not only are you enjoying a ride through the woods, you are spotting all sorts of little surprises, I'll just put it that way, that Diane and Mike have positioned for you to spot as you ride through the woods. Here's a little bit of audio from when Diane took us on a ride through the whimsical woods. Now, just disclosure, this is not going to be quite as easy to hear as the other audio because she wasn't professionally mic'd. This is just me holding a recorder up while we drove through the woods. So it might be a little harder to hear, but you get a sense of what it's like to sit shotgun with Diane as she drives through the whimsical woods.
Airbnb, but we store all our full cars. It's got a Mach 1 to 1970. In there, he just brought back the speed, and oh my god, that's beautiful. There's little trolls in the tree. Oh yeah. So there's just junk everywhere. This is not junk, it's awesome stuff. But it started out with first it was just a wagon ride through the woods, but then I added a few birds, and they loved it, said that. Okay, I got a lot of more room left, so we'll just see what I end up with.
So a lot of this place, including the trail ride we had gone on, kind of making another Northlandia reference here. It's just, this episode seems to just be littered with them. Reminds me of the bear trail up at Knife River, the Great Lakes Candy Kitchen up there, in terms of just seeing the cutouts everywhere and stuff. Granted, not specifically bear themed, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh yeah, and I think as a kid, I would have loved that kind of experience, whether you're talking about the Bear Trail, Dinoland, Fairyland. It makes me think of when I was a kid, we would go to, and I'm going to say where in the Northland this is because the family really does not want it to be known. It would be a great Northlandia, but we want to respect the family's wishes. But somewhere in the Northland, some listeners will know what I'm talking about, there is a little village made up of little houses that a family has built over generations. And if you know where it is, you can walk there. But again, it's private land. The family would prefer you not visit. And so I'm honoring that, now in my adulthood. That said, what I loved about that experience as a kid was a sense that, you walk into the woods and who knows what you'll discover. They're just little creatures. It gives you the sense of sort of magic and possibility. And I think you get that in Dinoland and Fairyland and on the Bear Trail. So I love that there are these artists and creatives and collectors in the Northland who are giving today's kids that experience in, might I add, a perfectly legal way that you can experience without trespassing on anyone's private land. So that's a win.
And going back a little bit, Diane had mentioned in that last soundbite an Airbnb. I feel like we should probably talk about that and how that factors into the whole enterprise.
Yet another thing Diane and Mike do on this land. There is an Airbnb that will accommodate fairly, sizable groups that they keep busy renting out. Here's Diane talking about how that came to be.
We had a second house on the property, and I really wanted to do a craft retreat. So actually in the wintertime, people can come and rent the space, and I can host up to 6 crafters. And so I get a lot of quilters and scrapbookers and card makers and things like that, and they come on up and enjoy that. But the rest of the year, it's on Airbnb for anyone to come and enjoy the farm as a farm stay.
So Whoopsa Daisy Farm is quite the enterprise. Does Diane have any thought of a second retirement at any point?
I know this couple are so busy, and it seems like this is exactly the way they want life to be. They're just very active and curious, friendly folks. Got the chance to meet Mike when I went back. I enjoyed visiting Whoopsa Daisy Farm so much on our reporting trip, Wyatt. I brought my family back just to experience the farm and got to talk to Diane again and meet Mike again and just see them interacting with visitors at the farm and see how much they love having people enjoy what they have experienced. And we haven't even mentioned everything that this couple does. They also are co-owners of the annual Motorhead Madness car show at the deck. Yeah, so that's just another project. Plus, Mike manages a couple of car washes and repairs other people's car washes. He's the go-to guy, apparently, if you need your car wash repaired, which seems like that'd be a valuable skill to have. I don't know how many people have it. They also dig things. They dig, apparently, basements. They dig graves. So this is a very, very, very busy couple. But I did ask Diane, I said, this is quite a lot you've accomplished here after technically retiring. Have you thought about what a second retirement might look like? What are your thoughts for the future of Whoopsa Daisy Farm? Here's what she had to say.
I don't think it's something I could really pass on. I'm going to be doing the Airbnb probably for quite a while. I think eventually my kids will probably buy the property and maybe I'll head off into the woods. I don't know. We'll see. But I'll just do it as long as I can and see what happens. I mean, either way, there's going to be berries and fruits and things here, so there's always things I can do. And I know I'm going to be vending at shows probably until I drop. So there'll always be things to keep myself busy with.
So while we were there, Jay, there was a mom with her own son enjoying the farm and all the attractions for it. It must have prompted you enough to bring your own son there. How was that experience for you?
It was really, really, really fun. There were so many parts of the farm that we'd experienced because we tried to give a fairly comprehensive look at the farm when we were there reporting. And so I my kid didn't even discover everything there was to discover, but he loved playing in the corn pit, which is basically just like a huge sandbox, as I was mentioning, full of dried corn kernels, and was at first kind of hesitant and just sort of sat on the edge and just scooped them a little and played with a couple of trucks. But then as, it was 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes went on, he got a little bit more adventurous and got a little bit more further into the corn and further into the corn until, he was fully in the corn pit. And then I could get in as well. It was big enough that I could play in it as though I was a kid. And so both of us are in this huge pit of corn, just like, playing around, sprawling all over this corn pit. This may not sound like everyone's idea of a good time, but we had a blast, and it was clear watching the other families visiting that they did as well. And again, that's just one of the attractions at Whoopsa Daisy Farm. So really, really a fun place to visit with your family. Another thing I asked Diane about was what their proportion is of locals to out-of-towners visiting the farm, since I report a fair bit on Duluth tourist attractions on the arts and entertainment beat. And I know at some attractions, for example, the Great Lakes Aquarium, they by far and away have most of their visitors on an average day come from out of town. Apparently about 70% of people who go to the aquarium are actually from the Twin Cities. And Diane said it's about, the reverse at the farm, that about 75% of her visitors on a typical day are actually from the Duluth Twin Ports area. And then, about a quarter come from further away. And I think what's neat about that to me, and I, love all these attractions. I'm glad that they all exist in Duluth. This is part of the, healthy ecosystem we want to have in the city, so to speak. I say so to speak because, of course, this is an agritourism farm. We're literally talking about the ecosystem. But what's neat about a place like this, it really does sort of feel like a hidden gem that the locals know about and the tourists have to discover, is that you see a lot of people who are clearly like coming back, and they come back again and again and again, and their kids are like, oh, I want to do this thing and that thing and that thing, and they sort of know about the things that they can do. And so it does sort of feel like a third place or a very comfortable spot for families to come back and visit again and again and again.
So with that, I know you already kind of gave your thumbs up of approval. Do you plan to go back there again?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I'll go back for berry picking. That was always a tough sell for me when I was a kid. My mom would be like, "Oh, let's go to the pit and go berry picking." I'd be like, if not berry picking means that I don't get the blueberry pancakes at breakfast, I'm okay with that. So we'll see if as an adult I can come around to berry picking, or if my kid feels differently about that practice. But other than that, I will go back definitely repeatedly and enjoy everything there is to enjoy at Whoopsa Daisy Farm.
Mm-hmm. And so, this question, Jay, you love it. Why do you think it fits well into Northlandia? Obviously, I feel like this fits the normal criteria you have of committing to the bit. There's definitely a lot of commitment here, certainly, and there's definitely the whimsical factor as well.
I was thinking about this question and thought about actually our train porter story, which is very, very different in terms of what it's about, the historical context and everything. But similarly, it's like Duluth was not a place, and the Northland generally, not a place where a lot of Pullman porters lived. But this one family, a porter and his wife, did settle in the Northland, create this incredible connection, this incredible story. And well, I'll let people go back and check that episode out if they want to know more about that. But it was sort of the Northland's connection to this bigger national story. In that case, about Pullman porters and their historic importance in the American economy and labor movement and what have you. And here, I think there's a larger story about agriculture in America, about agritourism, about the relationship of people today to the land, to farms, to what have you. But that looks very different around here than it does, say, in south central Minnesota, where both of my parents' families hail from after immigrating from Germany and Austria, largely. So, down there, both, my parents grew up being very close to farms. My mom lived on a farm for her childhood. Up in the Northland, it doesn't quite work that way. We don't have farms like that up here, not of that type, not of that quantity, et cetera, et cetera. We have rocks, we have mines, we have other kinds of agriculture. We have a surprising number of horses, I learned in the state fair story, but never mind that. I really like that this is a connection between our area here in the Northland and sort of broader story of farming and agriculture in America. And this is highlighting what is special about the Northland. We have blueberries here. We have this really cool, these woods and this landscape that you can enjoy. It is a little rocky and rugged, and Whoopsa Daisy Farm makes the most of that. And it is, as people know from every single episode of Northlandia, quirky and usually lovable.
Sparking endless curiosity.
Yes. I think it would be fair to say that this is one of those Northlandias where we literally did what the series description indicates, and we went off the beaten path. And we're in no rush to return.
That is true. That is true. All right, Jay, I think we'll wrap it up there. But before we completely wrap it up, I want to give us a chance to talk about a special project that you and I, mostly you, have been working on for quite a bit of time now. Listeners to the last episode know we've already talked about it once, but now the man himself, he's here on the podcast. Let's talk about your upcoming limited podcast series, Edmund Fitzgerald, 50 Years Below.
That's right. Starting October 13th through November 10th, we'll be releasing 5 episodes telling the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald from launch to loss to legacy. My hope is that all the people who know of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which we lost 50 years ago this year, people who know that vessel only through Gordon Lightfoot's song, or mostly through that song, maybe through the other occasional chance reference. Maybe they, glimpsed at the display at the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center or something like that. This will be a way for people to learn a lot more about the story of the ship without necessarily committing to reading the giant pile of books that you certainly could read. And so this won't be the last thing people will learn about the Edmund Fitzgerald. I can't promise that. There is much, much, much to know about this ship, but I hope this is an accessible and engaging way for people to learn more about the ship, about, importantly, the people who were on that ship, who were lost, and about why it continues to haunt people across the Great Lakes region and far, far beyond.
Mm-hmm. And you've been working on this for about a year now or something to that effect. And you and I personally have traveled all around the Great Lakes, as far north as Thunder Bay and as far east as Sault Ste. Marie.
Yes, this is one of the largest scale reporting projects I have to imagine the Duluth News Tribune has attempted in recent years, from the geographic scope of our research to the time we invested to the amount of audio we're producing. There are all sorts of associated features as well, including with video by you, Wyatt, and photos as well, original photos that you and our colleague Dan Williamson have taken, as well as a lot of archival photos. I raided the archives both at the University of Minnesota Duluth and the University of Wisconsin Superior, so there'll be a lot of very rarely seen images and documents that you can check out as you follow this series in the Duluth News Tribune. And this feels like a great subject to devote this kind of resources and time to, because this is a subject about which a lot of people are very curious and have a lot of feelings about, if only because they've listened to the song and feel haunted by the song, but don't necessarily know a ton about. And so I'm hoping that we can help people understand a little bit more about why the Edmund Fitzgerald was important, and not just why the Edmund Fitzgerald was important, but why Great Lakes shipping is important. Because it's not just the story of a ship, it's a story of what that ship was doing and what the other ships like it were doing and continue to do to this day. And so my hope is that people who listen to this podcast not only understand more about that specific ship, the Edmund Fitzgerald, but now every time they see a Laker pass beneath the aerial lift bridge, they will look in a really new way at that vessel and have a new understanding for what it's doing there, what its crew members do, and frankly, the risks that they take to fulfill that important role for our country's culture and economy.
Mm-hmm. And as Jay mentioned, the first episode will be dropping October 13th, and it'll be weekly from that point on for 5 episodes all the way to November 10th, the 50th year anniversary. And you'll be able to find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and all associated features on DuluthNewsTribune.com. And just to bring it back to the quirkiness of Northlandia a little bit, we did drive through a town called Christmas on our way to Sault Ste. Marie that most certainly, if it was in the Northland, would be a Northlandia feature. Just bring it back to the quirkiness. We definitely had that conversation when we drove through there.
It was so weird. This like small community with these gigantic Santa statues.
Yeah, that was definitely a time when I wanted to step off the beaten path and like, what's going on here? If it wasn't already such a long drive.
Yeah, it was both more and less than I hoped. It definitely was a very distinctive community, and I certainly, driving through the UP, which I had never done before. That we don't consider that the Northland because you have to draw the line somewhere. So we sort of cut off right around the Apostle Islands, but the UP. And now I have a completely new appreciation for how that has a culture of its own and would certainly be a great candidate for a series like this.
All right, Jay. Well, thank you so much once again, and we'll see you again soon.
Sounds good, Wyatt.
And thank you for joining us in this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this column, as well as see video and photos, visit DuluthNewsTribune.com/topic/Northlandia. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber of Duluth News Tribune at DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're on the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path in the rush to return, here in Northlandia.